Hi, I'm Jack Morse with the Gwinnett Woodworkers, and I've had several requests to demonstrate how I made this square hollow form. And what I'm going to demonstrate is how to make just the box part completely hollowed out all the way into the corners. And the way I do it, I start with a block of burl, and I find the center of it, and then I drill a 2 1/8 inch hole to fit a 50 millimeter jaws, and then I select which is going to be the top, and I drill an additional 1 5/8 hole, so when I'm hollowing this out from the inside, I don't accidentally turn into the chuck jaws. And then from there, it goes on the lathe. So I've got 2 holes drilled here. And so I'm going to put that on the chuck. That looks like it's turning nice and straight. Let me tighten it up some more. And I'm going to face off the 2 sides. And it turns. Find where my surface is there and line up my tool. And I want to do this before I cut off the sides, so I'm making sure it's perfectly flat. And then I can take my tool and put here and make sure I'm flat, and I am. Now do a little shear scraping here to clean up just a little bit. And a little bit of ripple in there, but that's all right. We'll just leave that. And set my pencil right on the live center, and I can mark it right there. Now that's the size hole I need for that chuck. And so I'm going to cut this in. Now I've got a tool that I made out of a cheaper tool, so I can do my dovetail on it. And now I can just come in here like this and put my dovetail in there. All right, now I'll pass that around. So the next step would be to turn it around and face off the other side. We're going to take this one that I already faced off and I've got to decide which is going to be the top and the bottom, which I already have decided that when I drilled my holes. And when I cut this off, I probably will still have a little bit of this left on there. By using that center mark there, I can use the compass. Yeah, I can go around and draw this circle. And I found the one side that's right on the edge there. And then from there, I'm going to find one side that's flat. And I'm going to draw a straight line, always using this same side to where I'm going to saw off the outside edge and get rid of all that wax surface. All right, so I can get those two lines real easy. And then to get the next line, I'm going to set the tri-square and get a mark here and a mark over here, and then I can draw that line, and now I know it's all perfectly square. And then I'll go into the bandsaw and cut those off. Before I start cutting on the bandsaw, I want to mention that, like any power tool, you can get hurt. So it's very important to follow all your safety rules and take your time and be very careful with what you do. Before I cut the sides off this block, right here, all four sides, get rid of this wax surface and make sure it's perfectly square. I want to make sure that the bandsaw is running perfectly true. So I'm going to put a square up there and check it from both sides. And then I want to start the bandsaw and make sure that the blade is running straight and not any wobble in it. So here we go. All right, I'm going to hand feed. I'm taking my time on this cut because I've got a very thick piece of wood that I'm cutting. If I overfeed it, the blade will go crooked. I move my hand back here so I can guide it and keep my hand out of the way of the blade. So there we got the first cut. We got a nice clean edge there. So I'm barely cutting anything there, so it's wanting to flip out of the cut. Let's come back the other direction here. You don't want to rush your cut on these real thin pieces and give it come out. I don't know whether you noticed or not, but here I was cutting end grain and here I was cutting side grain. And the end grain cut a lot faster because the shavings were smaller. When you're cutting a really thick piece of wood like this, you start cutting up here, and by the time it gets down here, your gullet is getting full of shavings and it's not cutting efficiently, and that will cause your blade, if you feed it too fast, it'll cause your blade to warp a little bit and you'll get a crooked cut. So it's very important to go very slow. On the side grain, your shavings roll up a lot longer and it packs up in the gullets, and so you have to even go a little slower on the side grain side. So now we have this cut. The next step is to slice this into, take a section out of the middle. And I'm going to take a 1/2 inch section out of the middle. And I've got 5.5 inches here. So if I go 2.5 and 2.5 from each direction, I'm going to end up about 1/2 inch in the center. And I think I will do that on this one and just keep it symmetrical. So now I have 2 more cuts to make on the bandsaw. And take that 1/2 inch out of the center. The 2 cuts I'm making right now are going to end up being a glue joint. And the way I make this box, once I finish it, there's going to be a square angled edge right there on that glue line to help disguise the glue line. So I want this cut to be nice and straight. Before I start cutting this block up, I want to put a wetness line on it, so I make sure I got everything lined up when I glue it back together. So I'm just going to put one line there off to one side. If I put it in the center, I still could get it wrong. So putting one line right there, I'll be able to line everything back up to put it back together. And we're going to be cutting end grain this time, so it should cut a little faster. I'm going to use the fence for this to help me keep it straight. And here again, I don't want to go too fast with that long cut, because then the blade will go crooked on me. It doesn't really matter the exact thickness of the center piece. So to make the top and the bottom the same thickness, I'm just going to turn this around and make my second cut here. I'm keeping the same edge on the bottom. All right, now that's the center section. This is the bottom, which will not have a hole all the way through. And this is the top piece, and the hole will go through. So these 2 blocks now have to be turned on the lathe. And this piece, we're going to take on the scroll saw and we're going to cut the center out of this. And we're going to leave that much wall. So we'll drill a little hole there in one of the corners, thread it on the scroll saw, and cut the center out. All right, now we're going to cut out the center piece and then set it aside till we're ready to glue it back together. Binding.
Yeah, he must be holding it down a little harder.
Yeah.
And the recommendation is don't use bargain basement blades.
Yeah, I think this blade just needs to be thrown away. There's no set to it at all, and this wood's a little bit gummy, so. But we got it removed. That's the important thing. And now we can set this piece aside, and we don't need it until we're ready to glue the box together. But what I will do is very lightly hand sand these edges just to get the little bit of fuzz off of it, and then it makes a tighter glue joint. But I don't want to do much sanding at all, just get the loose fuzz off. Now we have the piece that I already cut with the witness line there. Please don't forget it, because when it's rough cut like this, you may think you got it lined up and glue it together, and then after you get it smoothed down, you'll find out that the grain doesn't match up. So now we're going to set that apart.
Jack, is there any time frame that you work on this, like from the cut to the time that you glue it back together because of possible warpage? I mean, do you like, you can't set it down and leave it for 2 or 3 weeks? And
No, I like to just go right through and finish it as quick as I can. All right, now we're going to hollow out the inside of this. By the way, watercolor pencils work great on wet wood, where a regular pencil hardly marks wet wood. A watercolor pencil will just do wonders for it. All right, so I keep enough edge right here. I want to draw my circle around there so I can see it when I'm turning, and I don't want to go outside of that line. Now with the 3/8 bowl gouge, by the way, for you people turning bowls that you're having problems getting the bottom of the bowl just right, if you take your tool and anchor it right here with this hand, you can just push it right across the bottom and get a nice clean cut without any ripples in it. And if you come over here, you're going to go uphill, and if you come over here, you're going to go downhill. So you can adjust this right where you want it and go right across the bottom and get a nice clean cut without rubbing the bevel. So let's go back to hollowing this out. And I want to do this in a straight line. I don't want a curve to it because after I cut it on the bandsaw, I don't want to see a peekaboo hole. It kind of ruined the whole effect of the piece. And there's my hole in this, through the center where I pre-drilled that hole. If anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and speak up.
Hey Jack, when you first started, you took your tool rest and moved it to the tailstock. And did that give you the correct position for the tool?
Well, you want your cut to be right on the center mark. Since I didn't have a center mark there, I moved it over here. And I judged the thickness of my tool so that it would be right on the center. And that was just quicker to do that than go ahead and mark something here. So I can see my thickness that I have there and what I still have to cut out of here. Too heavy a cut going there. So making a hollow form this way, you don't have to keep blowing it out with the air hose. And I've got about the same wall thickness there. You can get brave and make it a little bit thinner, but then if you put your piece on the belt sander and you tip it and cut off a corner, you've got room to go ahead and square it up and get the piece all square again and save the day without throwing it away and starting all over. So there's the first half. We'll pass that around. And now we've got the second half. Okay, now this one I gotta be careful I don't go too deep. Sometimes if you turn your tool over in your end grain there, I'm actually cutting end grain there and pushing in. And it's an easier cut than trying to go this way, because when you get down to that nib, the feet per minute is practically nothing compared to what it is out here. So you've got to move your tool a lot slower. If you put too much pressure on it, you're going to tear out a hole in the bottom of your bowl, and then you either have to recut it or you're going to have to do a whole lot of sanding to ever get that hole out of the middle. And then sometimes it's too late. Your only choice is to patch it or firewood. when you want to go in and pick up a cut, you start by rubbing your bevel, and you can see a shadow there and the tip's not touching, and then you just slowly rotate until you find that sweet spot, and you can go in and pick up a cut without ever leaving a mark. Now, let's see how much we got here. And so I can take another 1/4 inch off there. So now I'm going to pick up the cut here, and I'm just going to change my angle just slightly. And there's my 1/4 inch. And just to be safe, I'm gonna not go to down to a point. I'm going to round it off. Seeing how nobody can get their finger in there once the bowl is finished. Okay. Now I'm not going to sand here, but if I want to, I can put this back on the lathe and sand it up to the point that I glue it together. So there's the other half. All right, now we're going to cut off the corners. And I've drawn a pencil line right to my glue line, but I want to cut outside of that line so I can sand down to that line on the belt sander. And I want that corner to be right on the glue line so it will disguise the cut there and people won't see it. And they'll think it's one solid block. All right, so here we go. Let's go ahead and cut them. Now that was the easy cut. And now we have to cut it this way, and to stabilize that, I'm going to put my lines on here where I'm going to cut lines. And So that's one side. Now we'll get this other side here. I'm marking off from the lines I had put there before and going back to the glue line. As I said before, I want to keep the pencil line, and we'll sand down to the pencil line. And so right now, this corner is right on the glue line. So once that's sanded down, you won't see it. So now I'm going to use my little jig here to hold the piece while I cut it, so it's not wobbling all over the place. So I've got my lines there. So now it's going to hold it steady for me while I make these cuts. That gives us our basic shape now. The only thing that's left to do is sand, sand, sand. And then we'll be ready for to make a base for it and the finial. So that's all the basic steps now except for sanding these edges. And I find it best with my stationary belt sander if I sit down where I can look right at it, so I make sure I set it down flat and don't round off the corner when I set it on the belt sander. But we had a base and a top, and there we have it. That's about it.
Thank you very much, Jack.